This problem asks us in part A to find the next pivot element, and to do that we're going to find one word for it is the most negative number, which is this one. Now this is actually the negative number that has the largest absolute value. So the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So the number with the largest absolute value is this one. Some people refer to that as the most negative number. And that's in this column. So we're going to use this column. And then to determine which row, this row or this row, we're going to take these quotients. We're going to divide this 10 by this number 2, right, the number in the pivot column. And 10 divided by 2, that's a 5. And then we're going to take this 6 and divide it by that number in the pivot column, which is 3. So we'll take 6 divided by 3, which is 2. And this is the one we're going to use because that is the minimum. We're going to take the smallest of these two quotients. So the next pivot element in part A of the problem is this 3. Now part B of the problem asks us to find the next tableau. And we're going to get the next tableau by making a pivot, and that's going to be on this 3. So we need to make that a 1, and then after we get that a 1, we'll get a 0 here and a 0 here. So to get a 1 here, what we will do is take row 2, replace it. Row 2 is going to become, let's divide it by 3, the current row 2 divided by 3. So if we divide this row by 3, we'll get 1/3. 3 divided by 3 is a 1. 0 divided by 3 is 0. 1 divided by 3 is 1/3. 0 divided by 3 is 0. 6 divided by 3 is 2. And we're just changing row 2. So row 1 stays the same. Row 3 stays the same. And now this is our pivot element right here. So now we need to get a 0 in this position and a 0 in this position. So to get a 0 in this position, we'll take the opposite of this number, negative 2, and multiply through the pivot row, and then add that to that row. So what we're going to do is multiply this row. So row 1 is going to become negative 2 times this row plus row 1. Let's see what that looks like. So multiply everything in that row 2 by negative 2, we'll get negative 2/3, negative 2, 0, negative 2/3, 0, and negative 4. I'll circle that so I don't lose it. Now to get a 0 in this position down here, we'll multiply the pivot row by the opposite of that number, which is 12. So I'm going to run a 12 through that entire row. So row 3 will become 12 times row 2 plus row 3. And that's going to look like this. So if we take 12 times 1/3, 1/3 of 12 is 4. We'll get 12 here, 0. 1/3 times 12 again is 4, 0. And then 12 times 2 is 24. Let's circle that so we don't lose it. Now let's add these rows. I'm going to add this row here to row 1. And then this row here to row 3, and this is what it's going to look like. All right, negative 2/3 added to 6. 6 we can write as a fraction as 18 over 3. 18/3 minus 2/3 is 16/3. And then negative 2 plus 2, that's 0. That's what we were looking for. And then 0 added to that 1 is a 1. Then we'll add the negative 2/3 to that 0, and that'll give us negative 2/3. And then this 0 gets added to that 0, which is still 0, and then finally this negative 4 is going to get added to that 10, giving us a 6. And now let's get our third row, our new third row. So we're going to take this row here, add those elements to the elements in this row. So what we're going to get is 4. We're going to add that to -4, which turns out to give us a 0. And then we'll take this 12, add it to the -12, and that's the one we were working on, and that's going to give us a 0. Then we'll take this 0, add it to that 0. Well, that's going to give us another 0. And now we'll take that 4, add it to that 0. That'll give us a 4. And then we can take that 0, add it to that 1. That'll give us a 1. Let's get a 1 there. And then finally we can take this 24 and add it to that 0, and that will give us 24. And that's our next tableau. But this tableau turns out to be the final tableau because when you look at that last row here, there's no more negative numbers. So now we can read off the particular solution. So I'm going to call this variable here y an active variable, and this variable here u an active variable, and this variable m an active variable. These are variables in whose columns contain a single 1 and the rest of zeros. Here's a single 1 and zeros. Here's a single 1 and the rest are zeros. Here's a single 1 and the rest of the entries are 0. So for the active elements, we can actually read values for them. What we'll have for this one is that this active variable y is equal to 2. So let's write that. We'll say y is equal to 2. For this active variable, we'll say that 1u is equal to 6. So u is equal to 6. And for this active variable m, we'll say 1m is 24. Now the variables in which the columns contain not just a 1 and all zeros, like this one, in this x column we don't have a 1 and all zeros. These are going to be inactive. So this is inactive, and that value of x is going to be 0. This one here, that's also inactive. I don't have a 1 and all zeros, so that v is going to be inactive, and that value is going to be 0. So we're going to have here that x is equal to 0 and v is equal to 0. And then this becomes the particular solution to our problem. But let me just add here. In this case, our last row has no negative values, so this is the particular solution to our problem. But if we did have a negative number down here, we would have to continue this entire process again and keep going until we have eliminated all negative numbers down here. So you can probably see that this method is a little bit tedious, and there's a lot of arithmetic that can go wrong here, so we have to be very careful. Or maybe we can use a calculator, and we'll try that in the next videos.